Larry Purnell created a model of 11 domains for cultural competence: localities and topography, communication, family roles and organization, workforce issues, biocultural ecology, high-risk behaviors, nutrition, pregnancy and childbearing practices, death rituals, spirituality, healthcare practices, and practitioners. For localities and topography, this is basically a description of the part of the world from which the cultural group originates or lives in. It includes its climate, and topography is in reference to its landscape. The heritage of the group is addressed in here, where their original native heritages or what societies basically formed to create the current cultural group. Acculturation: to what extent has the cultural group adapted to other cultures like Western ways of thinking? And education: to what extent does education influence their livelihoods? A second domain is communication, and this includes the dominant languages and dialects that are spoken in the cultural group. It also includes cultural communication patterns such as verbal communication. This can be phrases that you hear people saying. Nonverbal communication, gestures, facial movements, eye contact, even your personal space, how close or how much space you need between individuals. And touch. Touch does not have a universal meaning to all cultures. It has a different meaning dependent upon who is touching whom and what the touch is in reference to. Temporal relationships. These are your time orientations. Past time orientation, present time orientation, and future time orientation. Format for names and greetings. Is it appropriate to use titles when greeting people, or do you use first names? Does it depend on the relationship that you have with that person? The next domain is family roles and organization, and this domain covers head of household and gender roles, prescriptive, restrictive, and taboo behaviors for children and adolescents, family goals and priorities, and alternative lifestyles. Workforce issues address culture's impact in the workplace. How do they deal with conflict resolution? What is considered appropriate income and benefits for workers? What are issues related to autonomy? For instance, how autonomous are nurses in the workplace? Biocultural ecology. This deals with a lot of the genetic or indigenous characteristics biologically. It might be skin color, hair distribution, facial features of the people within the group. It might deal with genetic inclinations or predispositions for certain diseases or health conditions. There may be variations in drug metabolism based upon the biological characteristics of the people. High-risk behaviors. These are descriptions of high-risk behaviors within the cultural group. It may deal with alcohol consumption patterns. It might even be gender-influenced. Smoking behaviors. Drug use, and these are specifically the illicit drugs. Physical risks. A lot of younger people today do more high-risk adventures. Health-seeking behaviors. And safety practices. Nutrition is another domain which is very unique in some respects. While it does it is associated somewhat with the dietary practices and basically what are the nutritional needs or foods of the group. It also involves the values and meaning associated with different foods. What are their common foods that they eat? What are their rituals for meals, both breakfast, lunch, and supper? What are dietary practices that they associate with health promotion? What are some nutritional deficiencies characteristic of this particular group? Another domain, pregnancy and childbearing practices. What are the fertility practices? What are the contraceptive practices or family planning practices within that community or within that cultural group? What are the views that are common among pregnancy or towards pregnancy? What is considered appropriate prenatal care? And many of these perceptions will be both professional as well as traditional being the cultural beliefs. Prescriptive, restrictive, and taboo practices in the childbearing family. And I mentioned family planning already. Death rituals. Death rituals pertain to rituals both towards the dying and also those who have already died. It might deal with burial traditions. It might deal with wake traditions. What are the ways in which grieving is socially acceptable? What meaning is associated with death, with dying, and with life after death? It may pertain to whether people are comfortable even talking about death while persons are still alive, to do estate planning or advance directives may be culturally desirable in some societies, but may be very taboo in other ones. Spirituality. What are the dominant religions within the cultural group? What are some of the religious practices? What is perceived as ideal forms of prayer? Meaning of life? Sources of strength? Connectedness among each other as well as to a higher power. Spiritual beliefs and healthcare practices. How do their spiritual beliefs influence their life, their health practices? Healthcare practices and practitioners. We sometimes split these into two different categories. Healthcare practices relate to health-seeking behaviors. Who is responsible for health of a person or of a family? What are some folk practices that are done by the family? What are barriers to health care? What are cultural responses to health and illness? How do people feel about blood transfusion and organ donation? On the practitioner side, biomedical or Western healthcare providers are usually your doctors, nurses, dentists, pharmacists, physical therapists, people who have been trained through the Western healthcare system. There are also traditional practitioners who are considered healers, and these people usually learn their skills by apprenticeship under someone who has already been a practiced healer. They are sometimes selected based upon something unique about them, as if they have been pulled out by God or someone else. These are the practices that are very unique to the cultural group and are outside of the Western healthcare system. A folk practitioner is really a lay person who has absolutely no training, no mentorship or apprenticeship, but simply provides advice and sometimes practices different skills kind of as an elder within the social network. A spiritualist is someone who is like a curandero. This is someone who has been identified as a healer based upon spiritual realms. This one does not treat things from a biomedical perspective, but actually works from a spiritualistic or a spiritual paradigm. In other words, if you've lost some of your soul, or if you've been cursed, the spiritualist would be someone who would be able to help you with that. These are the different domains that we usually encourage students to do presentations before they go to the Philippines. These presentations give you an opportunity to develop an academic preview of what the culture is like. Once you go over there, you'll have the opportunity to encounter it firsthand, and at that point, you get to see how closely you are matching what you actually encounter.